Welcome. I'm Eric Snyder with Ignite360, and we are so glad that you're joining us today. Thank you for taking time out of your day to learn about what we think is a new direction. It's actually not thinking about a new direction. It is a new direction for Ignite360. I think for many of you, you have often said that Ignite360 brings a level of empathy into the work, the projects that we might work on with you. And we're going to begin to share out with you and unveil at the same time a new direction for Ignite360 by telling you a bit about what we do every day. And in sharing our expertise, hopefully you're able to use it in your roles in how you apply empathy in both decision making and critical thinking. So Empathycamp is a bit of a play on words. Think of a maybe boot camp, an immersion, if you will. And we're going to start our immersion right now with an overview of what Empathycamp is all about. Just like you do in camp, at the beginning of the day, there are always announcements. So I've got a headline announcement. Would you sign up to learn how to grow your business by 60%? Let me ask again, would you sign up to learn how to grow your business by 60%? I'm guessing a lot of hands would raise here and say, yes, I would sign up. Well, you've taken that first step by joining us today. We're going to show you how one company increased sales by 60% with a focus on empathy, an ROE, if you will, return on empathy. So let's find out more. As I mentioned, I am one of your, well, I didn't mention that I was a camp counselor, but I am one of your camp counselors for today. I'm Eric Snyder, Learning Catalyst and Insight Preceptor with Ignite360. I'm joining you from Phoenix. And also joining us today is Rob Volpe, CEO and Chief Catalyst of Ignite360. He's joining us from San Francisco.
Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today.
And we will be spending, Rob and I will be spending 45 minutes or so on our overview of Empathycamp. And we're also going to leave about 10 to 15 minutes for a Q&A at the end. So actually, you can chat with us, and you will probably see a chat button on your screen when you want to ask a question or when you want to participate in one of the activities that we have during our time together today. Go ahead and click on chat. Type it in, whatever, either the question or an answer, and know that what you are sharing with us will only be seen by us. So let's go ahead and begin. I think first it would be important to make sure we're all on the same page about what actually empathy is. Empathy is used in a lot of different ways. It's a word that we hear often used, especially in the work we do in market research. It's the ability to share someone else's perspective or their emotions. To share someone else's perspective. Easier said than done. And oftentimes, I think folks confuse or think about sympathy when they think about empathy. And I want to spend just a second talking about that. Sympathy is different from empathy, and I often say that it's the difference of 3 or 4 or 3 and 4 letters. Sympathy is your ability to feel for a person. When you think about sympathy, I think often a visual that might come into your head is someone who's had a loss of some sort and they're grieving. That sympathy, your ability to feel for a person, is different from empathy, which is the ability to feel with a person. You may not know exactly how they're feeling, but through the process of empathizing with them, you can learn more so that you're able to feel with them. Again, difference between 3 and 4 letters. Ability to feel for a person is sympathy. Ability to feel with a person is empathy. And quite honestly, in sympathy, you really don't know everything that's going on, but you can at least be there to show support. With empathy, through the process of learning more about someone, you have a different level of understanding about what it is that they might be going through. And in practice, empathy helps us build connections. It helps build in the relationships that we have, and ultimately can help to grow business. The empathy that we're talking about, for those of you that have spent time in the empathy space and have dug a little deeper in understanding what empathy is all about, we're talking about cognitive empathy, to understand a point of view. It's really a very conscious endeavor to recognize as accurately as we can to understand another person's emotional state and what they're going through. And in many cases, you might even hear empathy or cognitive empathy described as perspective taking. And that's the road that we're on right now. And for today, what we are going to be doing is introducing you to that empathy, that cognitive empathy application, sharing some practical knowledge and skills. So we will start to see, or at least you will start to see, some of that expertise, our secret sauce, if you will, that we bring in empathy into the projects that we work on. Then how do you take it further? How can you take what we talk about today, how can you take that one step further? And then, as I mentioned before, we'll have time for questions and answers, leaving about 10 to 15 minutes at the end of, or towards the end of our webinar today. So I'd like to introduce again, Rob Volpe, who will take you on the next portion of our discussion today.
Thank you, Eric. So hello again, everybody. The photo that you're seeing here might look familiar. It might have actually been your breakfast table today. It might have been dinner last night. It's that notion of people being together and alone at the same time. We talk about that as together, alone. And it's a situation that's been going on for a while where there's no conversation. People are focused on their device instead of interacting with each other. They're not connecting. And we're seeing this all around us, not only in the examples I gave you at home, but we're seeing it in cafes, you're seeing it at the school pickup line, school events, sporting events, movies, concerts. It's happening all around us. And that is something that's contributing to the empathy crisis that we're in. We are actually living life through our devices instead of taking life in as it happens. I think this photo is really wonderful in representing that. And I'm sure many of you can relate to this and have experienced it, where we're at an event, we're doing something, and we're documenting it rather than actually living it and experiencing it as the woman in the very front left is doing. I witnessed this for the first time about 18 months ago. I was at an art exhibit, and it was more of a pop art exhibit. You were allowed to take photos of everything. And I, just like everybody else, I was taking photos and lots of pictures. Oh, this one's so cool. I want to capture that. And then something broke me out of that lens. And I noticed everybody else was doing the same thing. And it made me realize we're not actually experiencing what is right there in front of us. We're actually seeing it through another prism or another filter. So how are we actually able to engage and connect and take on that perspective? Because if empathy is about seeing someone else's point of view as them, how can you do that and connect to people if you're actually staring at a device? So why is this happening? Well, you've probably heard about the bubble and that idea that we've isolated ourselves, we're contained with people who share the same views and can't see or hear through a different bubble, or be able to take on another lens. You might take a moment and think about the different bubbles that you're in. And bubbles begin, some of them we are born into, some of them are around us situationally, and some of them are created through some of our choices, or sometimes they're created for us. So bubbles can go anywhere, starting with your family, to the street that you live on, the neighborhood that you're in, the community organizations that you participate in or belong to, the town that you're living in. I live in San Francisco, and they've often said that we live in a bubble here. To the state, California. People will say that there's a bubble in the state of California as well. You can extend that into work. The company that you work with is a form of a bubble. And even within that, the functions, and whether you are out in the field at a factory, a manufacturing spot, or you're in the quote unquote ivory tower, those can be different bubbles. The job function that you're in, the department that you're on, the business unit, the team that you sit with, even the people that you sit with at work, all are examples of different bubbles. And then you get into the bubble that we often hear about, which is the social media bubble. And the way that your Facebook friends, you've cultivated your Facebook friends, and the way information is presented to you through Facebook, through Twitter, through other forms of social media. Collectively, what that means is we're not seeing or listening to our neighbors or our colleagues, let alone our consumers. Back in 2010, the University of Michigan released a study. They did a meta-analysis of over 70 studies from 1979 to 2009, talking to college students, understanding how and looking at how they relate to their other classmates, and if they are able to take on the point of view of their peers. And what they found was that there's 40% less empathy starting with students post-2001 than in those previous decades. So from 1979 up through the year 2000, and then there was a drop that existed. That they felt was due to various causes, some of the social media, the bubbles, technology. As you think about the way that's advanced over the decades, it's become very directional rather than all-encompassing. Kids not having the time to get bored and be creative all creates a situation where you're unable to take the perspective or understand another's feelings, and that's empathy. And so you can start to see, when you think about that, that's how empathy is starting to get dampened down, and can lead to a measurement of 40% less empathy than in prior decades. Empathy is something that you actually take with you. It's like one of your senses, or an innate characteristic that you have. This picture might also look familiar. You probably lived this. Maybe you lived it this morning already, or yesterday. But again, it's the idea of being together alone at a meeting, and people aren't fully engaged and connecting with whoever is speaking or the other members of the meeting. The distraction.
What were you talking about? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Eric. Were you texting or tweeting, or something was going on? Yeah. And that distraction of email and other things on our laptops, what's happening outside of that immediate meeting place, leads to disengagement. There's limited interaction, and you can't hear someone else's perspective if you yourself are distracted. So empathy is, and this empathy crisis, it isn't just about what happens in our personal life, it's coming into the workplace. And so what about all of this? Why is this even important? Well, empathy, as I mentioned, it's with you. It's a 24/7 trait that you have, and you do bring it to work. Lack of empathy impacts both your brand and the bottom line. And as Eric mentioned, we're going to illustrate that further in a few minutes. But it's about how we connect to our customers or our consumers. It's how we connect and relate to each other in the workplace, how we're able to apply critical thinking and decision-making. And so if you don't have empathy with consumers, it's going to be difficult to create products and services for them. Empathy is the foundation, it's the cornerstone, if you would, of every great insight that's out there. And that in turn fuels innovation. And I know we have quite a few insights professionals on the webinar today. Thank you guys for joining us. Empathy, for the insights professional, the empathy job is actually almost like double duty. If you think about somebody that's doing research or insights, you have to actually build empathy when you're sourcing the insights initially, when you're out in the field, when you're analyzing past work that's been done. So you're building empathy. And then you move into a synthesis phase where you're starting to figure out what does it all mean. And during that critical moment, you've also got to maintain that empathy while you're doing the synthesizing. So you don't want to lose those wonderful, rich stories and that connection that you have with your consumers as you're developing your insights and figuring out what it all means. And then, and this is where the pivot becomes complete, you then have to be transferring empathy when you're socializing your insights. So you're not just putting out a piece of information, you're actually sharing a story or helping that empathy build with the other stakeholders in your organization, whoever they might be, teammates, managers, leadership, etc. And we actually just posted a piece on our website that goes into more detail about this. But I wanted to just call that out because you end up in this unique situation where you're not only building empathy, but then you have to transfer it as well. So that creates some empathy, a need for an empathy champion, really, and a gift at the storytelling in order to carry that forward. So if you don't have empathy, how can you be effective marketing with consumers, working with your colleagues, if you don't have empathy with them? And again, this is empathy, as Eric talked about. It's not just taking their perspective, being able to see their point of view and bringing their point of view into the projects that you're working on and the decisions that you're making and the conversations that you're having. It allows you to be of service to your consumers. So here's an example of the empathy journey in the workplace. So imagine you're a retailer and your consumers are coming in, and say it's 2009, the recession's going on, people are hurting, family comes in and the parents say, hey, we're looking for something that we can build that'll let our kids play in the backyard and have fun just like we used to. We're not in the market at this point. We can't afford the big old swing set, but there is this really big tree that's really awesome, and the kids kind of enjoy climbing on it. So it'd be really great if there was something that would let the kids climb up into the tree and swing and use the tree in a different way. Okay, so you're in the retail, that family said that to the manager. The manager passed that on to his manager, maybe the district manager. That got passed on to the buyer, and the buyer said, oh, that's great. We need to have something that lets people climb up into trees so that they can swing. And that might actually look like this. This is how that buyer, the customer, explained it to a manufacturer. The manufacturing team, the R&D group, was like, oh, yeah, okay, great. So we need to build something that lets people climb up into a tree, sit in the tree, and swing. So the way they defined it, it looked like that. Now think about, we're taking the point of view of the consumer. You can start to see how without maintaining that point of view of the consumer and understanding they wanted something that the kids could play with, have fun with. There was an expression of a cost situation. It's 2009, the recession's going on. So you're starting to see, okay, there's some degrading of the empathy that's already happening here. So it gets defined like this. These are the specs. It goes out to the manufacturing team, and they're like, oh, yes, we can do this. This is a seat with a couple of ropes. And they put together a board with a couple of different ropes. And that's what ends up going out to the market. The marketing team gets hold of this, and they start to describe it as, oh, yes, it's this wonderful seat you can climb into. It's so comfortable. You can enjoy the view. You're sitting in a tree. It's really lovely. And they paint a picture that looks like this. This product ends up not working. One, it doesn't look like an armchair. It's the board with the swings on it. What the consumers were actually looking for something more like this, something that the kids could climb into, swing in a tree, have fun, the way that the parents used to, that was cost effective. They were looking for a tire hanging in a tree. So you can see in each step, that point of view of the consumer was diminished. The team went off course. The consumer gives you your North Star. And through telephone, through everything that happens, communication, the team goes off course till by the time this product hit the market, 90 degrees from where the consumer was. And I would imagine everybody that's on this webinar has had some sort of experience like this at work that they can relate to. So why is empathy important? Empathy at work, it lets you understand the consumer and see the world from their point of view. That point of view gives you an advantage, so you can better differentiate your product. It's going to allow your marketing to be much more relevant and on point. Your team works together, they're more engaged, and as a result, your business grows. So one example of a company that did have tremendous success, as Erica talked about earlier, 60% growth when they stopped and listened to the consumer and took the consumer's point of view. And this company asked the question, what is beautiful? How do our consumers see beauty and see beautiful? So you, as you individually are thinking about it, the first things that might come to your head when you think define beauty, you might think about supermodels, you might think about movie stars, flawless faces, red carpet, lots of makeup, glamorous dresses. That might be a standard definition of beauty. But this company went further, and they actually took the time to listen and hear from their consumers without bringing those stereotypes in. And what they discovered was that the perception of real beauty was real women. And so most of you probably recognize this photo. It's from Dove's Real Beauty campaign. Dove built empathy and used that as the cornerstone of their insight that led to the Real Beauty campaign. The results of that drove their sales from $2.5 billion to $4 billion in 10 years after the Real Beauty campaign launched. $2.5 billion to $4 billion. And the foundation of that was having empathy with their consumer.
And to take that a step further, when we think about empathy, and it's just been illustrated here with Dove, empathy really is a muscle in a way. If you think about your bicep or your biceps, it's something you use every day. And in order to help make it stronger, you train, you might go to the gym, you might have a trainer that helps you build those biceps. Well, in many ways, empathy is another muscle to train, to be able to practice to make stronger. So how do we build our empathy muscle? How do we go about that? Here are 5 steps that you can use to train, to build, and apply that empathy muscle. The first one is to dismantle judgment. This is a pretty big one. I know we probably would like to think that we don't judge, but guess what? We do. That judgment noise is on there 24/7. And what we're asking in this very first step is to put a pause. Press pause if you can. Put aside your personal biases or thinking. Because if that judgment noise is in the way, it is going to steer you into what you think or you want to hear. The second step is to ask good questions, to really begin to delve into understanding what someone may be going through or trying to take their perspective. There's good questions and there may be not so good questions. We probably all ask questions, but asking good questions takes a little more practice, making sure that we're not leading folks into what we think we want to hear. And asking good questions goes hand in hand with our third step, which is to actively listen. Asking good questions, actively listen, they work hand in hand, because if you're asking, you're also hearing and listening and then responding by asking other good questions. When we actively listen, we acknowledge not only in the words we use, but also in some of the nonverbals. I think the thing that we always hear is those folded arms clearly sends a signal that we're closed, we don't really want to hear. Actively listen in this hopefully space, we'll be having open arms, hearing what we may not know, and passing along through our non-verbal and verbal what we will help people to at least share with us. So asking good questions, actively listening. Once we have really spent some time, step 4 is to integrate it into understanding, to stop for a moment now. And what is the story? A lot of times we talk about the storytelling, the story that what comes to the surface and what we're hearing from our consumers or what we're hearing from a loved one. What is the message? What is coming through? And putting it together to see what are all the different elements that really tell that story. Once we have that, that's when we can start to apply what we've heard, what we have from that perspective in what is step 5, using solution imagination. This is an application, it's a guided process with tools to help you put into action what you actually heard. So today we're going to spend time on the first 2, dismantle judgment and asking good questions. So let's look at the first one, dismantle judgment. If you look at this picture, it's about taking off your own shoes first before you can put on another's. We talked about, it's easy to say, empathy is about taking or putting on someone else's shoes, but you can't do that unless you take off your own. Because even if you're looking at their picture, you're going, really, that shade of blue, brown shoes? I don't know. I wouldn't wear those. I don't like to tie up my shoes. I don't want shoelaces. And the color socks, really, I don't know. I would have probably worn brown socks with that. All of that noise is constantly going on. And those kinds of noises, those kinds of judgments unknowingly create assumptions that can easily misguide us. Some of the kinds of things that you've probably heard about that can get in the way are different biases that we might have. One of them might be confirmation bias, where, and I'm sure many of you can think about times when you've talked to consumers where you want them to confirm what you already have in your notes or have at least hypothesized as to what the next product should be or what that new packaging should look like. And we're just waiting to hear some confirmation that matches what we want to have. Another one is projection, where we ask the questions or we try to get information and we project out what we want them to say so that the person on the other side is actually saying what we want them to say. Another one is cognitive dissonance. That's a mouthful. And to think about cognitive dissonance, think about being on the sidewalk, walking along, you're in a hurry, and someone stops you and says, hey, do you have a moment? I've got a petition here I'd like you to sign to help save the whales. You're going, okay, I don't have a minute. I don't know if I want to sign a petition right now. And I don't know if, I want to save the whales, but I got too much going on and I can't do it. I can't do it right now. So that's cognitive dissonance. Another thing that can get in the way and as part of dismantle judgment, along with stereotypes and past experiences. We as individuals all bring in our own values, attitudes, beliefs, and experiences that we grew up with or experiences from other situations that all create that noise, that judgment noise that can get in the way. So again, dismantling judgment is pausing that, putting that aside. So how does that look? What's the benefit of dismantling judgment? As you look at what can happen with judgment, you start to create barriers that as each one of these pop up, these different biases, these different stereotypes, and they become a wall and block us from understanding. And as I was saying, keeping your arms open, so important to be able to even hear or be receptive to what we don't know or what we could start to hear. And guess what? You might hear and see way more than you realize or even thought about before you got there. So take a look at this picture. Is it flawed or flawless? Right away, you're thinking, oh my gosh, she has freckles. Oh my gosh, she has red hair. Or you might be, oh wow, she has freckles. Oh wow, she has red hair. She's not really smiling. There's no teeth. She's sort of just smirking. All of these kinds of judgments happen without us even doing a thing. But being aware of them can make a big difference in how you dismantle judgment. So let's go ahead and practice dismantling judgment. Write down the first number that comes, or type out the first number that comes to mind when you hear, I'll get back to you in a bit. How long is a bit? Write down the number or type in the number that comes to mind when you hear, I'll get back to you in a bit. And I will get back to you in a bit. This is a great time to use your chat button or your chat screen if you would like. So let me share some of the things that we're seeing. We're seeing half a day, 3 hours, 15 minutes, 2 days. We have multiple answers coming in right now, and no two are the same. So a simple thing like I'll get back to you in a bit, in and of itself is a kind of judgment. It's an assumption bias, if you will. We're making an assumption that everybody knows what a bit means. So think about what the nuances of how that can get in the way of being able to understand someone who's telling us much, much more. So if we are able to dismantle judgment, we can increase our ability to feel what it's like for that person.
So Eric, your perception of a bit is different from my perception of a bit, which that means we're not seeing each other's, we're not connecting. There's assumption bias, and then there's lack of empathy. Ultimately, when I don't meet your expectation for getting back to you in a certain period of time. Is that right?
Which of course never happens. But yes, right, of course. Absolutely. Thanks, Rob. So now what? How can you apply this first step? So I'm sure a lot of you are already thinking about, gosh, judgment factors into my life day to day. We're in a very fast-paced world, and those judgments are flying in as well. So what we're suggesting here is be mindful of when you're being judgmental. When you acknowledge it and you can press that pause button, that's how you can open your mind. So take this back to your team. Ask them the same question. See what kind of responses you get. Coworkers, even at home. What are you hearing? And at the same time, be a little forgiving. Because guess what? None of us are perfect. But the goal here is to really sort of move or shift the balance towards what we have been describing here in dismantling judgment, instead of keeping up or establishing those kinds of walls that can act as barriers and get in the way of being able to have empathy. So, Rob, this is It's
only the beginning. Yes, dismantle judgment is that first step. As you can see, there's 5 just to build and start to apply empathy. We have time left today to focus on asking good questions, so we're going to talk about that as well. So ask good questions. We often hear many people think that they ask good questions and that they know how to ask good questions. However, asking good questions is truly a skill, and it takes mindfulness and practice. Usually what happens, we're leading or we're asking closed questions, and those typically end up reassuring our worldview. I always think about the courtroom procedurals. I was a big Good Wife fan when that was on, and objection, Your Honor, leading the witness. That is an example. The lawyer is trying to get the witness to say something that will reassure the worldview that that lawyer and their client have and what they want to present and convey to the rest of the courtroom. So that's not good, however, when you're trying to build empathy, understand what's really going on with somebody. So you need to be more open. We talk about essential questions, and those can help get out of our bubble and take the world in. And an essential question is something that's broad-based and might allow a wide range of answers. So an example of an essential question would be, what does it mean to be successful on the job? When you ask that, whoever you're asking that question of, they can come back to you with a lot of different answers. They can go in a lot of different directions, but what you're doing is you're presenting it so that you're hearing their perception, their point of view of the answer to that question. And as you continue to go through, you can drill in and ask more questions around areas that you're interested in, or trying to understand what it is overall that they're communicating. So essential questions will lead to quality answers. Leading questions are unreliable answers. They're answers that are going to reinforce your worldview, keep you in your bubble, and not necessarily support you in your greater mission. And I will mention, because I do talk about closed questions. Closed questions do have their place, but in this case, we're talking about exploratory. You're trying to understand somebody's point of view. It's not just, do you like package A or package B? But you're really trying to get at a bigger picture and understanding of who they are. So it's really important to have open questions, and we'll talk about open questions in just a minute. But first, we have another exercise. We'd like you to just indicate which version of this question is leading. The first question, do you like an office with a door more than an open floor plan? Or the second question, what kind of office space do you prefer? Just take a quick second, send us a couple of answers using the chat function. Which version of this question is leading? First one on the left, just send number 1. Do you like an office with a door more than an open floor plan? Or the question on the right, what kind of office space do you prefer?
So Rob, I think this one, we have a unanimous first question is the leading question.
Yes, excellent. That is correct. The first question is leading. It's implying to somebody that they might answer the door rather than the open floor plan, which might be my worldview because I manufacture doors or something. So a few tips for asking good questions. As I was talking about earlier, you want to keep questions open instead of closed to get more information. So here again, a closed question is something that really is a yes/no. It doesn't give range for the respondent. Here you're kind of penned in. So this first question here, do you like our new office space? I can really only say yes or no to that. And that's a closed question. And again, it has its place in other types of inquiry that you're doing, but when you're trying to establish empathy, when you're trying to build connections with people, you want something that's more open, such as the second question example, which is, what are your thoughts about our new office space? That's open. Again, they can go in many different directions. The other tip that we wanted to share with you today, and I learned this, I will totally give credit to Riva, which is where we are all trained for moderating. And we learned there how to ask the question why without using the word why. Why is a really charged word in our language. If you're a parent, you might use the word why when you're trying to ask your children why they did something. Drew on the wall, used the scissors and cut the dog's hair. Or any other thing that they did, pulled their sister's pigtails. As a child, and if you think back to your own childhood, when you were asked why, it puts you on the defensive, and it continues today. There's a subtle reaction in response to this, in the way that you're responding to things. Why did you do that? Why didn't you get that report done in time? Eric, why didn't you get back to me when I expected that you would? You said you'd get back to me in a bit. Bringing in our example from the earlier question, exactly.
Thanks, Rob.
Instead, you want to try to find other words. Replace why with who, what, where, when, and how. And it actually softens the pointedness of the question. So instead of asking, why do you like a closed door office? You'd say, what is it about a closed door office that you like? Again, it's open. Somebody can answer it in a lot of different ways. And it isn't putting judgment into the question or being accusatory. So when you're asking good questions, what's the benefit of this? Why should we ask good questions? Well, you're going to get, as I've been talking about, you're getting a wider range of responses than anticipated. You're open. Again, there's that idea of openness. You're also getting deeper, more thoughtful answers. So you're going to learn a lot more, increasing your understanding of a situation. It's going to allow you to hear another person's point of view. And if you're not asking good questions as a group, you're left talking to yourself. And, again, I would imagine a lot of us have been in that situation where we feel like, wait, we're all just talking to ourselves. And sometimes you're just talking to truly yourself, and you're not taking the point of view of somebody else. So you're not actually building empathy, and you're not bringing in that point of view into the conversation. So another exercise for us to practice asking a good question. You've been asked to interview a candidate for a job opening you have in your department, but schedule's really busy. There's not enough time for a full interview. You can only ask one question. Which question do you ask? I'll repeat that, but just take a moment to share your thoughts. You've been asked to interview a candidate for the job opening you have in your department, but there's not enough time for a full interview, and so you can only ask one question. Which question do you ask?
Go ahead and use your chat button.
What's one question that you would ask? You can only ask one question.
So Rob, we've got some questions here. One that we have is, and they're flying up there now. Why are you the best candidate for this job? What makes you the best fit for this role? Tell me about you. Ones that might be even more open and elicit a wider response are those that might not have the word why in it.
Correct.
And perhaps changing it to, or rewording it to keep it a little more open. What is it about this job as you hear today? Might be one way to do that. Different perspective, more open, wider.
Yes. And it's interesting, I think it's a great example too for people where why first came up into your mind. It's just an example of how intuitive it is. And you're used to it. So hopefully we brought a little bit of awareness to that so that you can work on rephrasing and rewording some questions.
So what do we do with this? What can we, or how can we apply the second step that we talked about with asking good questions? Becoming aware, just as we did with that dismantling judgment, is important. Another one, as we just talked about, try as best you can to eliminate the word why. Try it for a day. See how that works. See how hard it is. Every time we try something new, it's good to practice. Notice what happens when you ask or don't use the word why in your questions. Take this back to your team as well. Ask them to do the same thing and see what you get back. So give them the same why challenge. So as we're seeing, folks, the empathy crisis is real. Rob pointed out a lot of different things that happen, not only in our bubbles at work, but also might be happening at home. The struggle is real. And as we talked about, empathy is a muscle. We train our biceps. Let's train our empathy, a skill that requires practice. Many of us might be out of shape. You know, we know how to ask questions. We do listen, Eric. We're doing all of those things. That's not saying that you're not. To do it even better and to really dive further into understanding where somebody's coming from, it takes some work. And it's not something we do every single day to tap into that level of empathy. But in order to do that, it may take some practice. So, like many of us have probably worked on our 2017 resolutions, we're here to help you take that first step in sort of rebooting or taking your empathy skills to the next level so that we can help you become an empathy champion, just like what we see here. So Rob, now that we've got our campers all intrigued, tell us.
Well, we wanted to talk about a way to take this further, and that one way is through Empathycamp. This was an initial overview we wanted to give you today to bring to light some of the different steps to empathy, what's going on, the empathy crisis. Empathycamp allows you to go deeper and really develop your skills. So what we've created is a suite of training workshops. They're designed to apply empathy in work situations involving critical thinking, problem solving, insight development, innovation, and more. It's a highly customized workshop developed to the needs not only of the organization, but also the attendees and the team. And we do that through needs assessment and intake surveys. We've got 3 different levels. First one, so we took the camp theme and played that out. So imagine orientation. That's like a half-day presentation, expanded on what you already started to see here. Initial exercises and thought starters gives people that awareness and understanding. Okay, here's what I'm going to need to do to build empathy. I've got some tips and practical tools and what I can do to start trying to apply it. And then we have what we call day camp, and I'll go into more detail about day camp in a minute. But day camp is a full day with exercises, activities, real people brought in for you to develop actual empathy with. So it's going to give you those practical skills to develop in real world application. And then we have boot camp. Boot camp is a 3-day offsite with immersion into each skill area. And you come out of that truly as an empathy champion. So as I mentioned, what does day camp look like? All of this is designed around learn, practice, and apply as our teaching method. So learning, why empathy? What are the different steps to build and apply empathy? Practicing it, building greater empathy with the customer, bringing actual consumers, real people in, and then applying it. And how do you actually put empathy to work, making it real? How do you speak with empathy as you're moving through your organization, as you're socializing whatever it is that you need to be sharing with people, and you're having those critical conversations or problem solving? It's a 7-hour day camp is set up as a 7-hour session on or off site. The clients we've been talking to about this, it's been a wide range actually, from teams that have frontline employees that deal with consumers on a day-to-day basis to other teams that are internal that just want to build more empathy into how they are working within their home office and in the corporate office. It's a small class style. There's 12 to 15 people. Again, there's consumer interaction. We use our proprietary Lifeology game to facilitate one-on-one play between our participants and the consumers and real people that we bring in. And there's an intake survey in advance. There's needs assessment. We want to understand the skill level of the people that are already there and areas of focus so that we can custom tailor the project, the camp, so that we can deliver the best results for everybody. So real practical skills that they can take forward. So just a few next steps. We've got about 6 or 7 minutes left.
Yes, so first thing you can help us do is help us improve. We're going to be sending out a very brief 5-minute post-webinar survey that you'll get in your inbox. Shortly after this webinar, we would love to hear your thoughts about our time together today. You can learn more about empathy and how you can customize some of the ways that you might be able to use it. You can reach us at hello@ignite360.com and join the empathy revolution. Follow us for more tips, get more information. Rob was talking about some of the things that we have out there already on different blog posts. Click on or connect with us on any of those channels that you see there. So with that, what questions do you have? We want to make sure, and as you see here, let's keep the conversation going, but what questions do you have for us today? Feel free to use the chat button again, or your chat screen, and ask away.
And Eric, I think I'll mention while we're waiting for people to formulate their questions, we'll be sending out a link for all participants to the video of this webinar. We've been recording it, so you'll be able to review, share it. We'll also have a link to a PDF of this presentation as well, in case you want to show it, look back, review anything, but also show it to some colleagues. And if you ever have any questions, always feel comfortable to reach out and email us.
So Rob, we have a question. What are the similarities and differences between empathy and insight?
That's great. So empathy is, as I mentioned earlier, we see empathy as a foundation or a cornerstone to a great insight. You need to establish empathy with the consumer in order to create the insight. The insight itself will have elements of empathy, and in the way that you're writing the insight, the way you're socializing it, you'll use empathy primarily through storytelling and different ways that you're talking about the consumer in order to keep that empathy going and have an empathy transfer. So again, I'll mention the blog post that I just wrote where we looked at empathy and its role in sourcing, synthesizing, and socializing of insights. So that might be a good read, but the way we talk about it and think about it is empathy is the story. Empathy is that underlying storytelling that's coming up. And one way that we've done that successfully with clients, when you're synthesizing, when you're having that debrief session, we encourage people to talk about the consumer as a person. Don't say he, she, don't say people, don't say consumers. Talk about John, talk about Patrice, talk about other consumers as real people. Tell the stories of who they are. Give that 360 so that you have something to connect to, because that's what people are looking for, and that's what's often missing in great insights. That's what keeps things from becoming a great insight, is there isn't that underlying humanity to it. And dimensionality that you can really latch onto. Otherwise, you're just looking at things as abstract data, if you would. Great question.
Rob, another question is, where does storytelling fit into empathy?
They are very interwoven. Empathy, you build empathy through storytelling, as I was just mentioning that. So if you take storytelling not just as, I'm going to tell you a story once upon a time, but anytime we're communicating with somebody, we're telling a story. We're telling a little bit of a story. So even when you ask that question, that essential question that we had early on about what does it take to be successful on the job, I think was the question. I'm telling you a story. I'm giving you information and a story about myself. And then you are in exchange receiving that and hopefully open, dismantle judgment. You're asking good questions. You're actively listening. You're integrating that into your understanding so that you're then able to start to turn that into a story that will help inspire people as you're sharing and transferring the empathy that you've got. But storytelling is critical. I don't think you would have a good story if there wasn't empathy somehow in it.
Well said. It looks like we don't have any other questions from our campers, Rob. It looks
all right. I look forward to hearing from people, and thank you guys so much for joining us. And just want to take us back to that final, that image we showed earlier, and just that reminder to be that woman. Be that woman who's taking it in, connecting with what's actually happening with her. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.